So first off, I want to reintroduce myself in case some of y'all don't know me. My name is Lupe Alcides. I am a Chicano from San Antonio, Texas. This is really going to be my personal biased opinion. Just straight up front, you guys, because of the passenger that I had, it really got me thinking. So I'm going to talk about my sobriety. If you don't like hearing about people using drugs or alcohol, then you may not like this video. It's funny because second passenger in the past few weeks that both veterans and both with addiction problems. I've struggled with addiction. I'm not gonna blame my drug use on the military. I got kicked out after 15 months of being in the Navy. It wasn't because of my drug use, but the drugs kind of influenced my behavior at the time. I had very poor judgment. I made stupid mistakes. I know sometimes. Anyway, but it wasn't because of drugs that I got kicked out. But it made me think, because of the fact that this is the second passenger that I've had in just the past few weeks that is a veteran, and whether they're recovering or not, they're addicts. The previous guy talked about how I felt really bad for him because he said that he's going through so much mental shit that he stays coked up all the time just to numb, or try to numb those thoughts and those feelings, because it was so bad that he was always coked up. This guy, he's used a lot of stuff right now. It sounds like he's in recovery, but it sounds like his drug of choice was more alcohol. And it's interesting because he talks about how, or he said that a lot of people think that harder drugs are harder to break, like coke or heroin. He said no, it's actually alcohol, because when you think about it, you have to go looking for a drug dealer that sells coke or heroin, and unless you know people, that is not easy to find. Now, if you go to any convenience store, what is the one thing that is most accessible in those stores? Booze. I mean, 90% of the convenience stores, it's right there when you first walk in. Especially when you're in the hood. They have it all iced up and ready to sell. And I never really thought about it. But another thing that I thought was interesting that we talked about was when I went to meetings, there was a doctor who talked about how he would use. And he said that when he would go to meetings, there was a doctor, a neurosurgeon, neuro, as in brain surgeon, that would actually perform surgeries under the influence. And I'm like, WTF, man. If I ever have to get surgery done, I'm gonna ask that MFer to go or to perform a sobriety test to make sure he's sober before he cuts me anything. It's supposed to be a joke, but it's funny, right? But we don't check doctors. We assume because they're professionals that they're okay, right? They're okay to perform that surgery or that procedure, right? And we don't think about it because we just put all our trust and money into these professionals and just assume that we're gonna be okay. But I was thinking about it, I'm like, we should either be able to perform sobriety tests on doctors, or we should be able to ask if we can perform some kind of check or test to make sure. I mean, that's part of the trust, isn't it? To be able to make sure that we feel confident in our medical professional. Interesting, right? But the reason I wanted to talk about my stuff is because I always felt like my path was riddled with obstacles because of my addiction, right? Obviously, the felony drug possession charge that hindered my employmentability, however you say it, my being able to be hireability, I think it's called. Whatever. Couldn't get a job for a while because people would straight up tell me, it's like, no. One of my favorite stories to tell is when I was in Little Rock, I applied to be the manager in training. The guy said, I want you on my team if you can pass a background check. And I straight up told him no. It's like, I will talk to the, corporate, whatever. And they straight up told him no. Which is one of the reasons that I say that we live in a hypocritical country. Because if I went to rehab and I successfully completed probation, don't I deserve a second chance? This country is supposed to be about second chances, but that's bullshit because we don't give people second chances. Anyway, I used to honestly think that it was a really, really hard struggle path that I encountered, went through, was on because of my addiction and all the stuff that I did and went through when I was younger. But I hear other people's stories on how they have had it harder. They have literally struggled and had to fight more than I could ever imagine. I honestly believe that the shit that I went through is nothing in comparison to what this guy has gone through and the poor other guy is still going through. One of those reasons is because of my sobriety. But it's one of those tricky things with me because I don't knock meetings or anything anonymous, because he literally went like that. If I hadn't stopped, he would have hit me. That piece of shit would have fucking hit me. Anyways, I honestly think that for me it was a choice. For me it was a choice because I had to choose to be sober. And they do talk about it in, the 12-step program about you have to have your moment of clarity and you have to decide that you want to stop. That's why I've talked about it on YouTube before about how shows like Intervention aren't really good ideas because people have to want to change. You could force somebody to go to rehab, but if they deep down don't want to go, they're not gonna sober up. And I'm living proof because when I went the first time, court ordered, I came right out using again. I changed the way I was using, but I still came out a user. And it's not the fact that once a user, always a user. It was because I personally did not want to stop. I was forced to stop. Even though I was sober when I was locked up, I was like, as soon as I get out, I'm getting high, which I did. So the second time, it was more of a personal choice. I decided, in my mind, in my heart, that I was done and that I was going to sober up. So for me, a lot of the terminology and stuff like that, it's hard for me. It really is, because like I was telling this guy, you know how they say once an addict, always an addict. To me, I don't believe that. I don't believe that, because I think that if you choose to stop, you can stop. It's any addiction, whether it's drugs, coffee, food, people. I think that if you really want to stop and change your lifestyle, that you can. The fact that I haven't coked up since April of 2004 is kind of proof that you can stop and you can change. So for me, it's hard for me to say that I'm an addict. It's hard for me to say that I'm a recovering addict. I tell people that I have had a problem in the past, but it's hard for me to say stuff like recovering addict or, you know, an addict at all, because me personally, if you offered me coke, which I have been offered many, many times since April 2004, even recently, if you offered me anything, I'd be like, nope, you couldn't pay me to get high. You really couldn't. You honestly couldn't. There's not any amount of money that you could offer me, even if you put the cash in front of me. You could not offer me any amount of money that would make me use again. But that's just me. I think that people can change like that. I don't think that it's just me. I don't think that I'm some kind of special person. I think a lot of addicts have changed and can change. I think it's just the temptation and the lifestyle changes that you make that determine whether you can stop and you can change and blah blah blah. Because me personally, I do stuff like I work out, I meditate. I have made a conscious decision to never use again. So for me, I have certain instruments in place that will prevent me from using. I think that if you just, you know, go to rehab and go to classes, meetings, but, you know, if you have it in your mind that, and I'm not attacking anonymous places, but I think it's bad to tell people stuff like once an addict, always an addict. You will always be an addict, because they put that in the back of their mind. Oh, well, I'm an addict, I'm always going to be an addict. There's always that chance that I might use again. Because if you have that in you, then that's like your fail-safe, right? That's like your scapegoat. Oh, well, I had a relapse because I'm an addict. There's always that chance that I will use again. So you can't blame me. You got to blame it on my addiction. Now, I might get a lot of shit for that one, but that's just my personal opinion. I honestly think if you would stop telling people once an addict, always an addict, or you will use again or you might use again, I think if you start telling people to train their brains differently, like you can convince yourself that you don't need this drug, you can convince yourself that you will never use again. That's what I did back in 2004 when I decided to stop using. When I went to treatment, and going to treatment and rehab at you know, two different places. It was the same place, but they changed the program to where it wasn't a rehab anymore, it was treatment. I think that was a lot better. Having gone to rehab and treatment, I think treatment is a lot better. It's supposed to be a year long. I don't know if it needs to be that long, but I think some people do need that long. One, so you can break, get clean, and get it out of your system. but another reason to do the whole psychological repairing that needs to be done. I think personally, I'm not a professional, so don't quote me on this, but from my experience and a lot of the stuff that I've learned and have picked up over the years, like meditation and a lot of the spiritual stuff that I've encountered, I think that if you did a lot of that stuff, teaching people how to meditate, teaching people techniques on how to deal with cravings. I only know that because I had to take a weed class because I was stupid and I was honest to, the system and told them that, yeah, I have used before. So that's another thing that people, because they hear stuff like once an addict, always an addict, they will assume that because you have used before, you will always be an addict. And that's what I was telling this guy, is like, that's what I don't like, is that people look at you through the eyes of that mentality. Once an addict, always an addict. Well, you've used before, there's always a chance that you're going to use again. That's why a lot of people wouldn't give me jobs. That's what I was, my theory is that's why I think that's why a lot of people didn't want to give me a job, because they saw me as an addict. They couldn't see the fact that, yes, I went through treatment. Yes, I successfully completed probation, and I'm done. Nobody ever bothered to ask me, it's like, hey, when was the last time that you used? Are you done using? Blah, blah, blah. And I think that, if we stop being a hypocritical society and just ask people stuff like that, put me up to a fucking lie detector test. I'll be honest with you. There's no chance in hell. Like Vince McMahon says, no chance in hell that I will ever use again. But we don't do that. We just see what's on paper. Oh, he used 18 years ago, 20 years ago, he used. So that means that there's always going to be the chance of him using again, because once an addict, always an addict. That's what they say. That's what they say. Blah, 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 whatever, right? It's not just the anonymous that needs to change, but society as a whole. We need to stop seeing recovering addicts as problems. I'm sure that there's some people that have problems staying sober, and the sad part is that if they're trying to stay sober, shouldn't you be more supportive of their trying to be sober instead of just punishing them for trying to be sober? And I don't mean that just from a job perspective. I mean that from a family and friend perspective. If you know somebody who is actually legit trying to be sober, trying to, recover from their addiction, you have to understand that shit is not easy. It's not. If you do certain drugs, your body becomes so dependent on it. You literally will do anything to get that fix. It's not 100% a mindset, because when you get so addicted to certain drugs, your body will take over your mind, and you don't have any control over your mind. So you can't, it's not easy to just say, no, I know it's bad for me, so I'm not gonna use. I know I've been using for the past 6 months and I'm addicted to it, but everybody tells me that I have to stop, so I'm gonna stop. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. People that have never used drugs, have never drank before, I'm sure you're addicted to something, whether it's coffee, chocolate, eating. I always think it's funny that some of the biggest critics of addicts are people that are addicted to something else that's not an illegal substance or alcohol. Doesn't make you better than them. It just means that you can get your shit legal, like coffee or candy or tacos or whatever, right? And no offense, but the coffee addicts are some of the worst judges, critics, because that shit's not good for you either. It's not. Just because it's legal, just like booze will fucking kill you. Coffee is not good for you either. It sure as hell is not good for your heart. But that's another subject. Anyway, I think that if we change a lot of the way we see things like addiction and recovering addicts, I think this would change a lot of, not just a lot of stuff, but a lot of relationships. Why don't you try doing more research instead of just seeing addicts as bad people? Oh, you're a drug addict, so that makes you a bad person. Maybe they turn to drugs because they can't deal with their shit. Like my tío Neto, he and I didn't figure this out until I was an adult. He took his wife leaving him so hard that's why he drank, because he couldn't deal with the pain. It didn't make him a bad person. It just made him human. And as a human, he couldn't deal with his human problem, so he turned to drinking to help him deal with the problem. That's what a lot of people don't understand, is that you deal with your issues not because you can't handle it, because you don't know how to handle it. And so you try to drown out those feelings, those emotions, that pain. You try to numb it as any way possible. If drinking helps you not deal with the pain, guess what? You're gonna fucking drink. And if it helps numb the pain every single day, guess what? You're gonna drink every fucking day to deal with it. It's not hard. I mean, it's not easy. It's not. And that's what this is why I get annoyed, because people that have never been through addiction on drugs, because, like I said, coffee and candy isn't their addictions too. They just don't have Coffee Anonymous that I know of. I think that the majority of the people that try to look down and judge drug addicts should take a long, hard look in the mirror before they start pointing the finger. Because what does the Bible say? Judge not, lest ye judge yourself. He who is without sin cast the first stone. So before, what is the other one about? Before trying to take out the splinter from your brother's eye, take out the telephone pole from yours first. So maybe instead of being quick to judge people, especially if you're a Christian or call yourself a Christian, maybe you should try to understand what the person is going through, why they're addicted, why they can't stop, why it. And a lot of times it's not that you choose not to, it's that you can't, because your body is so dependent on that substance. You can't just stop. You can't, especially if it's something like alcohol, where they sell it everywhere. You can go into Valero and there's a whole bunch of shit you could buy. Not just booze anymore. They sell wine now. Some of these convenience stores have like an elaborate wine collection. If you've ever been to a convenience store, you will see it. But like I said, that's my own personal biased opinion. That's my perspective because of what I've gone through, what I've seen, what I've experienced, and what I have picked up and learned over the past few years. But my main message that I'm trying to get across to you is, instead of being a self-righteous, holier than thou judge, maybe you should just take the time to get to know somebody and try to understand why they're struggling with their addiction the way they are. I bet you might learn something, you might see that person differently, and you might even see addiction differently.